The autumn sun poured through the dusty windows of room 143, catching the dust motes that danced in the air. 28 students shuffled in their seats as the clock ticked toward the end of the school day. In the back row, 12-year-old May Lynn hunched over her notebook, pencil moving in quick, precise strokes. She wasn't taking notes on Ms. Calloway's enthusiastic speech about the upcoming talent show. Instead, her page filled with intricate patterns that spiraled and connected, looking something like music notes but not quite. A language of her own making. And remember, this is your chance to shine. Ms. Calloway's voice rose with excitement as she pushed her oversized glasses back up her nose. The whole school will be watching. Parents, teachers, maybe even people from the community. Who knows? This could be your big break. May sank lower in her chair. The last thing she wanted was a big break. She just wanted to get through 7th grade without anyone noticing her too much. Now, who's brave enough to sign up today? Ms. Calloway held up a clipboard with a flourish. Don't be shy. Hands shot up around the room. Zach, who played guitar in a band with his cousins. Prisha, who had been taking dance lessons since she could walk. Tyler, who did magic tricks that actually fooled people sometimes. Ms. Calloway beamed as she wrote down their names. This is wonderful. Anyone else? Mee kept her head down, pencil still moving. Her drawing had taken the shape of a spiral that somehow seemed to pulse on the page. If she could just stay quiet for 3 more minutes, the bell would ring and she could slip out unnoticed. May, how about you? May's pencil froze mid-stroke. She looked up to find 27 pairs of eyes turning toward her. I don't really do anything, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ms. Calloway wasn't having it. Everyone does something. I've seen you doodling in class. Maybe you could display your artwork? May felt her cheeks burn. Her drawings weren't meant for other people to see. They were just things that came out of her head when it got too full. Or, Ms. Calloway continued, undeterred by May's silence, didn't your mother mention at parent-teacher night that there's a piano in your apartment? Do you play? The piano. The dust-covered monster that took up too much space in their tiny living room. The thing her mother never touched but refused to get rid of because it had belonged to May's grandmother. Not really, May said, but Ms. Calloway had already written something on her clipboard. Wonderful. We could use more musicians. How about a simple piece to start with? Breathless, perhaps? Most beginning piano students learn that one. The bell rang and the room erupted into motion and noise. Mee shoved her notebook into her backpack, hoping to make a quick escape. But Ms. Calloway was surprisingly fast for someone in impractical shoes. May, wait, she said, putting a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. I didn't mean to put you on the spot like that. May looked at her shoes. They were getting too small, but she hadn't told her mother yet because money was tight. I don't really play the piano, she admitted. We have one, but you could learn a simple piece in 3 weeks, Ms. Calloway said, her eyes bright behind her glasses. I truly believe everyone has something to share with the world, something that makes them special. May doubted that. She wasn't special. She was just quiet May, who lived alone with her mom in the apartment complex by the train tracks, who wore the same 3 outfits to school on rotation, who always had pencil smudges on her hands. I could help you get started, Ms. Calloway offered. I have sheet music for Breathless and it looks harder than it is. May wanted to say no. She wanted to explain that the piano wasn't just unused, it was untouchable, a shrine to the grandmother she'd barely known. But the hope in Ms. Calloway's eyes made the words stick in her throat. Maybe, she said finally, which was apparently close enough to yes for Ms. Calloway, who broke into a wide smile. Excellent. Here, take this. She thrust a folder into May's hands. Basic sheet music. Come see me if you have questions. This is going to be wonderful, May. Just wonderful. And then May was alone in the empty classroom, holding a folder of music she couldn't read for an instrument she didn't play. The walk home took 23 minutes if May didn't stop anywhere. Today she walked slowly, kicking at fallen leaves and dreading what waited at home. Not her mother. She wouldn't be back until after midnight, her nursing shift at the hospital running late as it always did. No, what May dreaded was the piano. It sat in the corner of their living room like an unwelcome guest that had overstayed its welcome by years. A faded floral shawl covered part of it, and on top sat framed photos of May's grandmother, stern-faced in black and white. May remembered very little about her grandmother. She had died when May was only 4, But she remembered her hands, thin and wrinkled but strong, with nails cut short. And she remembered sitting on her lap while those hands moved across piano keys, creating sounds that made May feel like she was floating. The apartment was quiet when May unlocked the door. On the kitchen counter was a note from her mother. Dinner in fridge. Homework before TV. Love you, sweet girl. May set down her backpack and the folder of music. She should do her homework. She should eat the leftovers her mom had carefully packed away. She should do anything except what she was about to do. But her feet carried her to the piano anyway. She pulled off the shawl, releasing a cloud of dust that made her sneeze. The wood beneath was dark and scratched in places. Carefully, as if it might bite, May lifted the cover over the keys. They were yellowed with age, some of them stained a tea-brown color. From her folder, she pulled out the sheet music for Breathless. The notes on the page made as much sense to her as hieroglyphics. How did people look at dots and lines and know what sounds to make? This is stupid, she whispered to the empty room. I can't do this, but her finger reached out anyway and pressed a key. The sound rang out startlingly loud in the quiet apartment. May jumped back as if burned. The note hung in the air for a moment, then faded. She tried again, pressing a different key. Another note higher this time, then another, and another. Something strange happened as her fingers moved tentatively across the keys. The random notes didn't sound random to her. They sounded like possibilities, like each one was a door that could open into someplace new. May set the sheet music on the piano stand and tried to make sense of it. There was a note at the top that said E-D, E-D, E-B-D-C-A. Were those the notes? How was she supposed to know which key was which? She tried pressing keys until one sounded right for the first note, then tried to follow the pattern. The result was a halting, clumsy version of what she guessed might be the beginning of Breathless, though it sounded nothing like what she'd heard before. Frustrated, she closed the sheet music and was about to give up when her eyes fell on her grandmother's photo. The stern face seemed to be judging her. I'm trying, she told the photo, but I don't know how to do this. As if in response, a memory surfaced, her grandmother humming as she played, her eyes closed. She hadn't been looking at sheet music. She'd been playing from somewhere inside herself. May closed her eyes. She placed her hands on the keys like she'd seen her grandmother do. And instead of trying to play someone else's song, she just played. What came out wasn't Breathless. It wasn't anything she recognized. It was halting at first, disconnected notes that seemed to be searching for each other. But then something clicked. Her left hand found a pattern, a simple rhythm that anchored her. Her right hand began to create a melody above it. Nothing fancy, just a series of notes that felt right together. She opened her eyes, startled by what she'd done. It wasn't good exactly, but it was something. Something that had come from inside her, not from the sheet music she couldn't read. For the next hour, May forgot about homework and dinner. She forgot about the talent show and Ms. Calloway and her classmates' stares. She just played, exploring the keyboard, finding which notes sounded good together and which created a tension that needed to be resolved. By the time she finally stopped, her fingers were stiff and her back ached from sitting up straight for so long, but something had changed. The piano no longer seemed like an unwelcome guest. It felt like it had been waiting for her all along. That night, May dreamed of her grandmother's hands guiding hers across the keys, teaching her a language made of sound instead of words. When she woke, her fingers were still moving, playing silent melodies on her blanket. She would never be able to play Breathless for the talent show. But maybe, just maybe, she could play something else, something that was hers alone. And for the first time in years, May Lynn was actually looking forward to going to school, if only to tell Ms. Calloway that yes, she would perform at the talent show after all. Just not in the way anyone expected. The next morning, May woke before her alarm. For a moment, she lay still, listening to the sounds of her mother moving quietly around the kitchen. The smell of rice porridge drifted under her door. Then she remembered. The piano, her fingers on the keys, the sounds that had come from somewhere inside her. Had she dreamed it? Had she actually made music? May slipped out of bed and padded to the living room in her mismatched socks. The piano sat in the corner, the shawl still crumpled beside it where she'd left it. The keyboard cover was open, revealing the yellowed keys that had just hours before responded to her touch. You're up early, her mother said from the kitchen doorway. She looked tired, dark circles under her eyes from the night shift, but she smiled at May. Hungry? Mom, May said, ignoring the question. Did Grandma teach anyone to play? Her mother's eyebrows rose slightly. She came into the living room, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Your grandmother? No, she was very private about her music. Why do you ask? Ms. Calloway wants me to play in the talent show, and She what? Her mother's voice sharpened. May, you don't play the piano. I know, but... May hesitated. How could she explain what had happened last night? The way her hands had seemed to know what to do? I tried a little. After school yesterday, her mother looked at the piano, then back at May. Something flickered across her face, surprise, concern, something else May couldn't name. You never showed any interest before. I know. And the talent show is when? 3 weeks. Her mother sighed, running a hand through her short hair. May, learning piano takes years, not weeks. I don't want you to be embarrassed in front of the school. I could play something simple, May said, though she knew already that for Elise was beyond her. Or maybe I shouldn't do it at all. I can tell Ms. Calloway I changed my mind. Her mother was quiet for a long moment, looking at the piano with an expression May had never seen before. A mixture of sadness and something that might have been longing. Your grandmother wouldn't let anyone touch her piano, she said finally. Not even me, her own daughter. She said our hands were made for different things. She looked down at her own hands, strong and capable from years of nursing. But maybe yours aren't. She crossed to the piano and picked up her mother's photograph, studying the stern face. If you want to try, May, then try. But don't do it for your teacher. Do it for yourself. May nodded, relief and nervousness battling in her stomach. Now eat your breakfast before it gets cold, her mother said, setting the photograph back down. And don't forget your science homework. Later, after her mother had gone to bed and May should have been getting ready for school, she stood again in front of the piano. The morning light made the dust more visible. Years of it settled into the wood grain. I don't even know where to start, she whispered. But that wasn't quite true. She remembered how it had felt last night when she'd closed her eyes and just played, like the music was already inside her, waiting to be let out. She closed her eyes again and placed her hands on the keys. This time the notes came more easily. The simple pattern her left hand had found yesterday returned, but today it seemed to want to grow, to become more complex. Her right hand picked out a melody that wandered up and down the keyboard, sometimes delicate, sometimes bold. She lost track of time, lost in the discovery of what her hands could do. When she finally opened her eyes and saw the clock, she gasped. She was going to be late for school. She grabbed her backpack and raced out the door, her mind still filled with music. All the way to school, her fingers tapped rhythms against her leg, playing an invisible piano. The day dragged endlessly. In math class, while Mr. Porter explained fractions, May found herself thinking about how music was math, really. Patterns and ratios, time divided and multiplied. The rhythm she'd been playing that morning had a pattern. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. A waltz, though she didn't know to call it that. In English, while they discussed a poem, May thought about how music was like poetry without words. Her fingers drummed silently on her desk, working out a new melody. May, are you with us? Mrs. Wu's voice broke through her thoughts. Yes, sorry, May said, her face heating up as a few classmates snickered. Then perhaps you'd like to read the next stanza. May looked down at her book, trying to find where they were. The words swam before her eyes, rearranging themselves into patterns that reminded her of music. At lunch, she sat alone as usual, but she didn't mind. She opened her notebook and began to draw. Not her usual abstract patterns, but lines and dots that she somehow knew were music. Not proper sheet music. She still didn't understand how to read that, but her own way of recording the sounds in her head. A line that went up when the notes climbed higher, down when they dipped. Dots for short notes, dashes for longer ones, stars for the moments when something unexpected happened in the music, a turn she hadn't planned. What's that? May looked up to find Zach standing over her table, guitar case slung over his shoulder. She quickly closed her notebook. Nothing. Didn't look like nothing. He sat down across from her without asking. Ms. Calloway says you're playing piano for the talent show. I'm not very good, May said, which felt both true and not true. She didn't know the first thing about playing properly, but what had come out of the piano had felt right. Cool, Zach said. What song? May hesitated. I don't know yet. Well, if you figure it out and want someone to play guitar with you, let me know. He grinned, revealing a crooked front tooth. My band dropped out of the talent show. Something about my cousin breaking his arm skateboarding. Oh, May said, surprised by the offer. Thanks. But she already knew she'd play alone. The music in her head didn't have room for guitar. After school, Miss Calloway caught her in the hallway. May, how's the practice going? Do you need help with the sheet music? I'm figuring it out, May said, which wasn't exactly a lie. But I might not play for Elise, I might do something else. Miss Calloway's eyebrows rose. Oh, what did you have in mind? I'm not sure yet, May admitted. Just something different. Well, as long as it's appropriate for school, Miss Calloway said with a smile. I'm sure whatever you choose will be lovely. May wasn't so sure, but she nodded anyway. That evening, she went straight to the piano after finishing her homework. She'd meant to just try a few things, maybe work on the melody she'd started that morning. But once again, time slipped away from her as she played. This time, she tried something new. Instead of just letting her hands wander over the keys, she thought about how she felt. About sitting alone at lunch most days. About how her mother worked so hard but still worried about money. About her grandmother, who she barely remembered but whose piano now spoke to her. The music changed as her thoughts did, becoming quieter, more thoughtful. Her left hand found a pattern of 3 notes that repeated, steady as a heartbeat, while her right hand played a melody that rose and fell like someone breathing in their sleep. She was so absorbed that she didn't hear the door open. Didn't know her mother was home until she felt a hand on her shoulder. May jumped, her hands crashing down on the keys in a discordant shock of sound. Mom, I didn't hear you come in. Her mother's eyes were wide, her work bag still slung over her shoulder. May, that was... She shook her head as if she couldn't find the words. Where did you learn to play like that? I didn't, May said, looking down at her hands. They seemed like someone else's hands now, capable of things she never imagined. It just happened. Her mother set down her bag and sat beside May on the piano bench. It creaked under their combined weight. It sounded like her, she said softly. Like your grandmother. Really? May looked at the stern face in the photograph. But I don't remember how she played. Maybe your hands remember what your mind doesn't, her mother said. She reached out tentatively and pressed a single key, the note hanging in the air between them. She used to play at night after she thought I was asleep. Music I'd never heard anywhere else. She smiled, a sad smile that made May want to hug her. I asked her once where the songs came from. She said they'd always been inside her waiting, just like the music was waiting inside May now. Not the same music, but music that was hers alone. Mom, she said, is it okay if I keep playing, even if I'm not very good? Oh, May. Her mother wrapped an arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. You're already better than you know. That night, May dreamed of playing the piano on a stage, the keys glowing under her fingers. But when she looked out at the audience, there was only one person there. Her grandmother, no longer stern-faced but smiling, nodding in time to the music. When May woke, her pillow was wet with tears she didn't remember crying, and her fingers were still moving, playing silent music in the dark. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur for May. Every morning, she woke early to play before school. Every afternoon, she rushed home to the piano, forgetting about snacks or television or the few friends who sometimes invited her to hang out. The music had become a hunger in her, growing stronger each day. Her notebook filled with her strange musical drawings, lines and dots and stars that made perfect sense to her but would confuse anyone else. She'd stopped doing her usual abstract patterns. Now everything she drew was music. Her teachers noticed the change in her. Not just that she was distracted, her fingers tapping out silent melodies on her desk, but that she seemed different somehow, more alive, more present, even when her mind was clearly elsewhere. May, can I see you after class? Mr. Porter, her math teacher, asked one day after catching her drawing music instead of solving equations. She waited nervously at his desk after the other students had gone, expecting a lecture about paying attention. Your test scores are going up, he said, surprising her. He slid her latest math quiz across the desk. A red 98% was circled at the top. They are? Significantly. You've always been a good student, but lately... He tilted his head, studying her. It's like something clicked. Especially with the patterns and sequences. You see them differently now, don't you? May shrugged. Not sure how to explain that the patterns in math suddenly seemed like the patterns in music. Logical progressions. The way one note had to follow another in a way that made sense. Miss Calloway mentioned you're playing piano for the talent show, he said. I didn't know you were a musician. I'm not, May said automatically. I mean, I'm just learning. Mr. Porter nodded thoughtfully. You know, there's a connection between mathematics and music. Some of history's greatest mathematicians were also musicians, and some of the greatest composers were essentially mathematicians. May thought about the patterns she'd been discovering on the piano keys, how certain combinations of notes created feelings, how the timing between notes was as important as the notes themselves. Is that why music has measures and beats and stuff? She asked. Because it's math? Exactly, Mr. Porter smiled. The Greeks believed math was the language of the universe and music was just another way of speaking it. He glanced at her notebook with its strange markings. Looks like you might be discovering that for yourself. May tucked the notebook closer to her chest. Maybe. Well, I look forward to hearing you play. And keep up the good work in math. At home that evening, May thought about what Mr. Porter had said as she sat at the piano. Math and music. Patterns and feelings. She placed her hands on the keys and closed her eyes, thinking about numbers. The Fibonacci sequence they'd learned about in class, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, each number the sum of the two before it. What would that sound like as music? She began to play, trying to translate the mathematical sequence into notes. One note repeated, then another note the same, then a combination of the two. Then three notes that somehow contained the first two patterns. On and on, each musical phrase building on the ones before it, growing more complex but still connected. It wasn't beautiful music exactly. Not at first. But as she kept going, something magical happened. The mathematical pattern blossomed into something more, something that spoke not just of numbers but of growth, of life unfolding according to invisible rules. She was so absorbed that she didn't hear her mother come in. Didn't know she wasn't alone until she felt a presence behind her, and turned to find not just her mother but also Miss Calloway standing in the living room. May's hands froze on the keys. Miss Calloway? What? I'm sorry to drop by unannounced, her teacher said, looking flustered. I ran into your mother at the grocery store, and when I asked about your piano practice, she gestured helplessly. I hope you don't mind. I was curious. May's mother gave her an apologetic look. I invited her for tea. I didn't know you'd be playing. What was that piece? Miss Calloway asked, stepping closer to the piano. I don't recognize it. It's not a real piece, May said, suddenly embarrassed. Just something I was making up. Miss Calloway's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. Making up? You mean you were improvising just now? May wasn't sure what improvising meant, but she nodded anyway. That's, Miss Calloway seemed at a loss for words. May, how long have you been playing piano? May looked at her mother, not sure how to answer. 2 weeks? Her whole life? The truth was somewhere in between. She just started recently, her mother said, but her grandmother was a pianist. A very good one. I can tell. Miss Calloway looked at the piano with new respect. May, what you were doing just now. Most piano students can't improvise like that after years of lessons. It's a special skill. I was just playing with math, May mumbled, feeling her face grow hot. Math. The Fibonacci sequence, she explained, pointing to her notebook where she'd written out the numbers. I was trying to see what it would sound like. Miss Calloway stared at her, then at the notebook, then back at May. That's remarkable. May's mother stepped in, setting a hand on her shoulder. Would either of you like some tea? I made cookies too. Later, after Miss Calloway had gone home full of cookies and questions that May couldn't really answer, her mother sat beside her on the couch. Are you upset that I brought your teacher here? She asked. May thought about it. No, she said finally. But I was surprised. So was I, her mother admitted. Surprised by what you can do. She smoothed a strand of hair away from May's face. You know, you don't have to play in the talent show if you don't want to. Ms. Calloway would understand. The talent show. May had almost forgotten about it, even though it was the reason she'd started playing in the first place. The thought of playing in front of the whole school made her stomach twist into knots. What if they laugh at me? She whispered. What if I mess up? Her mother considered this. You might, she said honestly. And yes, some kids might laugh, but others might not. Some might be amazed like Miss Calloway was. She took May's hands in hers, looking at the fingers that had somehow learned to make music. The question is, does playing make you happy? Did it? May thought about how the world disappeared when she played, how the music filled up all the empty spaces inside her, how it made her feel connected to her grandmother whom she'd barely known. Yes, she said, it does. Then that's what matters. Her mother squeezed her hands. Not what anyone else thinks. The next day at school, May couldn't focus on anything. Not because she was thinking about music, but because everyone seemed to be looking at her differently. Whispers followed her down the hallway. Someone had heard from someone who had heard from Ms. Calloway that May Lynn was some kind of piano prodigy. Is it true you're playing your own music for the talent show? Prisha asked her at lunch, sliding onto the bench across from her. Ms. Calloway told my mom you're really good. I don't know about that, May said, picking at her sandwich. So what are you playing? For Elise? Chopsticks? My little brother can play chopsticks. I haven't decided yet, May lied. She knew exactly what she wanted to play. The Fibonacci piece she'd been working on, which had grown into something rich and strange, like a plant that sprouted flowers no one had seen before. Well, everyone's talking about it, Prisha said, biting into an apple. No pressure or anything. But there was pressure. May could feel it building like a storm gathering on the horizon. Suddenly, playing for the talent show didn't seem like just a small school performance. It felt bigger, more important, as if something was at stake that she didn't fully understand. That afternoon, for the first time since she'd discovered she could play, May walked slowly home. The urge to run to the piano was still there, but now it competed with a new feeling: fear. What if Miss Calloway had built her up to be something she wasn't? What if everyone came to the talent show expecting some kind of child genius and got just May? At home, she stood in front of the piano without touching it. The keys seemed to watch her, waiting. I don't know if I can do this, she told her grandmother's photograph. The stern face gave no answer. May's fingers hovered over the keys. Just 2 days until the talent show. 2 days to decide whether to play the Fibonacci piece, which no one had ever heard before, or try to learn a simple song that wouldn't surprise anyone. 2 days to decide whether to be the quiet, invisible May or someone new. Her fingers made the decision for her, coming down on the keys with certainty. The Fibonacci sequence unfolded, but now it had evolved into something more. A story told in notes about patterns hidden in the world, waiting to be discovered. About a girl who had music sleeping in her blood, waiting to awaken. As she played, May knew there was no going back. The music had changed her, and after the talent show, for better or worse, everyone else would see that change too. The day of the talent show arrived with dark clouds hanging low in the sky. May woke to the sound of rain drumming against her window, a rhythm that immediately translated into music in her mind. Her hands moved beneath the covers, playing on an invisible piano. Today was the day. She'd barely slept. All night, the Fibonacci piece had played in her head, evolving and changing like a living thing. Sometimes she'd jolted awake, reaching for her notebook to capture a new idea before it slipped away. Her mother peeked into her room, already dressed in her blue nurse's scrubs. Big day, she said with a gentle smile. How are you feeling? Sick, May admitted. Her stomach was a knot of nerves. Maybe I should stay home. Her mother came and sat on the edge of the bed. You could, she agreed. No one would blame you. Performing is scary, especially the first time. She brushed May's hair away from her forehead. But I requested the evening off specially. I haven't seen you play yet, not properly. May hadn't known that. Her mother almost never took time off, especially not evening shifts, which paid better. You did? Mm-hmm. And I invited Mrs. Chen from next door. She's been asking about the music she hears through the walls. The thought of her mother in the audience made May's nervousness worse in some ways, but better in others. It would be good to have someone there who loved her no matter what happened on that stage. Okay, she said. I'll go. Her mother smiled. Good, now eat some breakfast. Musicians need their strength. At school, the air buzzed with excitement. The talent show was a big deal. The one time each year when parents and community members came to the school in the evening. When teachers dressed up. When students got to be something other than students. May moved through the day in a fog, barely hearing her teachers, her mind filled with music. The Fibonacci sequence had grown into something far more complex, like a single seed sprouting into an entire garden. She still didn't have a name for it. In her head, she just called it the pattern. Earth to May, Zach said, waving a hand in front of her face at lunch. He'd taken to sitting with her since that day he'd seen her musical notebook. You okay? You look kind of green. Nervous, she admitted. About tonight. You'll be fine. Everyone gets stage fright. It's not just that. May pushed her food around on her plate, not hungry. Everyone's expecting something amazing. Ms. Calloway told people I'm really good. Are you? Zach asked bluntly. Good, I mean. May didn't know how to answer that. She'd never heard anyone else play piano except her grandmother years ago, and recordings of famous musicians that Ms. Calloway had insisted she listened to over the past week. She didn't sound like any of them. I'm different, she finally said. Zach grinned. Different is good. Different gets remembered. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Before she knew it, the final bell was ringing, and Ms. Calloway was hurrying around, giving performers their time slots and last-minute instructions. May, you'll go second to last, she said, pressing a sheet of paper into May's hands. Just before the choir. That's a featured spot. The paper had May Lynn piano solo printed on it with a blank space next to it for the name of her piece. Me realized she still hadn't decided what to call the pattern. What are you playing? Ms. Calloway asked, noticing her hesitation. Something I wrote, May said, her voice barely above a whisper. Based on the Fibonacci sequence. Wonderful. What's it called? May thought about the way the music had come to her. Not from outside, but from somewhere deep within, as if it had been waiting for her to discover it. As if it had always been a part of her. The sleeping song, she decided. It was the song that had been sleeping inside her, just as her mother had said her grandmother's music had slept inside her. Ms. Calloway wrote it down. Perfect. Now go home, rest a bit, and be back by 6. The show starts at 7. Rest was impossible. At home, May tried to eat the early dinner her mother had prepared, but each bite seemed to stick in her throat. Her hands kept moving, playing the sleeping song on the tablecloth, the couch armrest, her knees. Maybe you should play it one more time, her mother suggested. On the actual piano. Get it out of your system before the show. It was good advice. May sat at the piano, placed her hands on the keys, and closed her eyes. The music came immediately, flowing through her like water. The Fibonacci sequence was still there, the mathematical backbone, but it had become so much more, a melody that spoke of growth and discovery, of patterns hidden in plain sight, of secrets passed down through generations. As she played, the knot in her stomach began to loosen. The music wasn't just hers anymore. It had become its own thing, a living creation that she was simply helping to bring into the world. Her job wasn't to be perfect. It was just to let the music be what it needed to be. When she finished, she opened her eyes to find her mother watching her with an expression of wonder. May, she said softly. That was beautiful. For the first time, May believed it might be true. They walked to the school together through the light rain, sharing an umbrella. The parking lot was already filling up with cars. Inside, the gymnasium had been transformed with colored lights and a stage set up at one end. Rows of chairs filled the floor where usually there were basketball games and PE classes. Performers this way, Ms. Calloway called, waving May toward a side door. Family members can find seats in the audience. May's mother gave her a quick, fierce hug. You'll be amazing, she whispered. Just play like you did at home, like no one's watching. Then May was following Ms. Calloway into a classroom that had been converted into a waiting area for performers. Some kids were stretching, others practicing dance moves in corners. Prisha was going through a routine with 2 other girls, their movements perfectly synchronized. The piano is already on stage, Ms. Calloway told her. It's been tuned specially. May nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The reality of what she was about to do was sinking in. In less than an hour, she would sit at a piano on a stage and play her strange mathematical music for a gymnasium full of strangers. Time seemed to stretch and compress. One moment she was sitting alone in the waiting room, silently practicing the sleeping song with her hands in her lap. The next she was standing in the wings, listening to applause as Tyler finished his magic act. And now, the principal's voice boomed over the speakers. Please welcome May Lynn, performing an original piano composition titled The Sleeping Song. May's feet carried her onto the stage, though she couldn't feel them touching the floor. The lights were bright, turning the audience into a dark, faceless mass. Somewhere out there was her mother, Mrs. Chen from next door, Zach maybe, though he'd already performed his guitar solo earlier in the show. The piano waited at center stage, its black surface gleaming under the lights. It was bigger than her grandmother's upright piano at home, grander, a real concert piano. May sat on the bench, adjusting it slightly. The keys looked different, not yellowed with age, but pristine white, the black keys glossy as wet stones. She placed her fingers on them and they felt cool and unfamiliar. Panic rose in her chest. This wasn't her piano. Would the music still come? Would her fingers remember what to do on these strange keys? The audience waited, a collective held breath. May closed her eyes. Think about the pattern, she told herself. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. But it wasn't the numbers that came to her then. It was the image of her grandmother's hands on piano keys, her mother's face as she listened to May play. The way the music had awakened something in her that had been sleeping her whole life. Her fingers began to move. The first notes of the sleeping song filled the gymnasium. They sounded different on this piano, richer, clearer, more alive. May opened her eyes in surprise, watching her hands as if they belonged to someone else. The music poured out of her, and as it did, she forgot about the audience. Forgot about Ms. Calloway and her mother and everyone who expected anything from her. There was only the pattern, unfolding like a map to somewhere she'd always been meant to go. She didn't play the sleeping song exactly as she'd practiced it. New variations emerged, spontaneous and surprising even to her. The mathematical pattern was still there, but now it danced and spun in ways she hadn't planned, taking on a life of its own. When the final notes faded away, May sat very still, hands hovering above the keys. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever, a held breath, a space between heartbeats. Then the applause began. Not polite, obligatory clapping, but a wave that built and built, filling the gymnasium with sound. May looked up, blinking in the bright lights, and saw something she never expected. People getting to their feet. First just a few, then more, until it seemed the whole audience was standing. She found her mother in the crowd, tears streaming down her face, her hands clapping so hard they must have hurt. Next to her, Mrs. Chen from next door was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Ms. Calloway appeared at the edge of the stage, gesturing for May to take a bow. Dazed, she stood and gave an awkward little nod. The applause grew even louder. In that moment, looking out at the blur of faces, May understood what her mother had told her. The applause, the standing ovation, they were nice, but they weren't what mattered. What mattered was the music itself, and the joy it had brought her. The way it had awakened her, the way for 7 minutes on that stage she had been completely, truly herself. May floated through the rest of the evening in a daze. The school choir performed after her, but she barely heard them, still caught in the afterglow of her own music. When the show ended, people she didn't know came up to congratulate her. Parents of other students, teachers she'd never had, even the principal, who shook her hand formally as if she were an adult. "Remarkable performance, young lady," he said. Simply remarkable. Ms. Calloway fluttered around her like an excited bird. "May, that was extraordinary. I knew you had something special, but I never expected. Where did you learn to play like that?" May looked to her mother, who had made her way through the crowd to her side. "I didn't learn," she said simply. "It just came to me." "But that's not," Ms. Calloway began, then stopped herself. "Well, however it happened, you have a gift. A rare and precious gift." Her mother put an arm around her shoulders. "We're very proud of her," she said. And the simple words meant more to May than all the fancy compliments from strangers. They walked home together through the gentle rain, which had slowed to a soft mist that made halos around the streetlights. May felt lighter somehow, as if something heavy she'd been carrying had been set down at last. "You were beautiful up there," her mother said as they turned onto their street. "Not just the music, but you. The way you played, like you were having a conversation with the piano." "It felt like that," May admitted. "Like the piano was talking back to me." Her mother nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Your grandmother used to say the same thing, that a piano wasn't just an instrument but a partner." They were almost home when a car pulled up beside them, slowing to match their pace. The window rolled down to reveal Mrs. Chen from next door, her gray hair wrapped in a scarf against the damp. "May Lin," she called. I've been hoping to catch you. That performance of yours? I've never heard anything like it. Would you mind if I told my nephew about you? He teaches music at the university. Oh, May said, surprised. I guess that would be okay. Wonderful. He knows people at the conservatory who work with young musicians. Special ones like you. Mrs. Chen beamed at them. Good night now. And thank you for the beautiful music. As the car pulled away, May looked up at her mother, a question in her eyes. The conservatory? She asked. What's that? It's a school for musicians, her mother explained as they climbed the steps to their apartment. A special one where people go to study music seriously. The thought hadn't occurred to May before. That music could be something she studied, something she could pursue beyond playing alone in her living room. Do you think I could go to a place like that? She asked as they stepped inside. Her mother didn't answer right away. She hung up their damp coats and turned on the lights. The piano sat in its corner, the keys still exposed from May's practice earlier. It seemed different somehow, less an odd piece of inherited furniture and more a living presence in the room. I think, her mother said carefully, that you could go anywhere you wanted. Do anything you set your mind to. She sank onto the couch, suddenly looking tired. But conservatories are expensive, May, and they usually want students who've had years of formal training, who can read music and know all the technical terms. Oh, May said, her excitement dimming. Of course, everything cost money and they never had quite enough. And she was just a beginner, really. No matter what everyone at the talent show had thought. Her mother patted the couch beside her. Come sit. I want to tell you something. May sat, tucking her feet up under her. Her mother took her hand, examining the fingers that had created such music just hours before. When I was about your age, I wanted to be a doctor, she said. Not just a nurse, but a real doctor who could fix anything. I told your grandmother, and do you know what she said? May shook her head. She said dreams like that weren't for people like us, that I should be practical, aim for something within reach. Her mother's voice held old pain, but no bitterness, so I became a nurse instead. And I love my work, I help people every day, but sometimes I wonder what might have happened if I'd ignored her, if I'd believed in myself more. She looked May directly in the eyes. I don't want you to wonder like that. If music is what you love, if it's what makes your heart feel full, then we'll find a way. It won't be easy, but we'll try. May threw her arms around her mother, burying her face in her shoulder. Thank you, she whispered. Later, after her mother had gone to bed, May sat at the piano in her pajamas, not playing, just resting her fingers lightly on the keys. The day had been a whirlwind, changing everything and nothing. She was still May. The piano was still the piano, but the world around them had shifted, making room for new possibilities. She pressed a key, then another, playing the first few notes of the sleeping song. It already sounded different to her, younger, simpler than what she could hear in her head now. Her fingers found new patterns, new combinations of notes that seemed to tell the story of this day, this moment. She played softly, aware of her mother sleeping down the hall, of Mrs. Chen next door who might be listening through the wall. The music was gentler than what she'd played on stage, more like a question than an announcement. What comes next? The music seemed to ask, where do we go from here? The next morning was Saturday, which meant no school. May slept late, worn out from the emotions of the previous day. When she finally wandered into the kitchen, she found her mother sitting at the table with a box of old papers spread out before her. What's all this? May asked, pouring herself a bowl of cereal. Your grandmother's things, her mother replied. I've kept them in storage all these years, but after last night I thought. She gestured to the chair across from her. You might want to see these. May sat down, peering at the papers. They were yellowed with age, covered in handwriting she didn't recognize, elegant characters in Chinese alongside what looked like musical notations. These are songs, she realized, picking one up. Grandmother's songs? Her mother nodded. She composed music just like you. But in China during the Cultural Revolution, it was dangerous to be an artist, to stand out in any way. When we came to America, she thought she could start again, but by then, she sighed. By then I think her music had been sleeping too long. She played only for herself and not often. May studied the pages, wishing she could read the notes, understand what her grandmother had created. She wrote about you, you know, her mother said, sliding a worn journal across the table. After you were born. Here. May opened the journal carefully. The writing was mostly in Chinese, which she couldn't read, but on one page, in careful English, were words that made her breath catch. My granddaughter May has her father's smile, but her hands are mine. When she sits on my lap while I play, she watches my fingers with old eyes. The music is in her, I think, waiting. I hope it wakes before it is too late, before it becomes a ghost that haunts her as it has haunted me. Tears pricked at May's eyes. She knew, she whispered. Somehow she knew. She believed music was in our blood, her mother said. A gift passed down, but also a responsibility. May gently touched the journal, feeling connected to the grandmother she'd barely known. I wish I could have heard her play, really heard her now that I'd understand. I think she would say you've heard her, her mother replied. Through your own hands. The doorbell rang, startling them both. When her mother opened it, Ms. Calloway stood there practically vibrating with excitement. I'm so sorry to intrude on your weekend, she said, stepping inside. But after last night, I couldn't wait. I spoke with an old college friend who teaches at the community music school. She turned to May. They have a scholarship program for exceptional students. It would mean formal lessons, music theory classes, performances with their youth orchestra, and it wouldn't cost your family anything. May looked at her mother, whose face was carefully neutral. What do you think, May? She asked. Is that something you'd want? The question was bigger than it seemed. Lessons would mean structure, rules, learning to play the way other people thought she should play. But it would also mean understanding the language of music better, meeting other young musicians, maybe even someday being able to read her grandmother's compositions. Would I still be able to play my own music? She asked Ms. Calloway. The stuff that comes to me? Of course. That's what makes you special, May. They wouldn't want to change that. Just give you tools to express it even better. May looked around the small living room, at the piano that had changed her life, at her grandmother's papers scattered on the table. She thought about the sleeping song and how it had felt to play it for an audience, to share what had been inside her. Then yes, she said. I'd like to try. The weeks that followed were a blur of change. The video of May's performance, taken on a parent's phone, spread beyond the school community. People she didn't know commented online about the young pianist whose music sounded like nothing they'd heard before. Mrs. Chen's nephew came to hear her play and left with wide eyes, and talk of special programs. May began formal lessons at the community music school, learning to read notes to understand the structure she'd been instinctively creating. It wasn't always easy. Some days the technical exercises felt like they were crushing the natural flow of her music. Some of her teachers tried to correct habits she'd developed on her own, but others recognized the unique gift she had and worked to nurture it, giving her the tools to go further without changing her essential voice. And every evening, she still sat at her grandmother's piano, playing the music that came from somewhere deep inside her. Her mother would often sit nearby, listening with eyes closed, connecting with her own mother through the hands of her daughter. One night, as May finished a new piece she'd been working on, she noticed her mother wiping away tears. What's wrong? She asked, alarmed. Nothing's wrong, her mother said with a watery smile. I was just thinking about what your grandmother wrote, about the music being in you, waiting to wake up. She reached out and touched May's face gently. I think she'd be so happy to know it finally did. May closed the piano, thinking about the long journey that had begun with Ms. Calloway's simple request to play in the talent show, about how saying yes to one small thing had opened a door she hadn't known existed. It's awake now, she agreed, and I don't think it will ever sleep again.